2:47 in the morning. The phone screen lit up on the nightstand. A voicemail notification from a number I hadn't bothered saving but recognized immediately. Please, please pick up. The entire codebase is breaking. Everything is failing. I don't know what's happening. The deployment pipeline is throwing errors I've never seen before. The client dashboard is completely down. Please, I know you don't owe me anything, but I'm begging you, fix it for me? Please call me back. That was the voice of the man they hired to replace me. The Silicon Valley Wunderkind, the Stanford prodigy, the Forbes 30 under 30 darling who walked into our office 3 weeks earlier and called my code interesting choices. He was sobbing into his phone at 3 in the morning because every single system he had touched was on fire. A $37 million government contract was about to collapse, and the classified data he was supposed to protect was exposed to unauthorized access. 23 days. That's how long he lasted. But I need to back up, because this story doesn't start with a voicemail at 2 in the morning. It starts in a glass-walled conference room where a woman from HR looked me dead in the eye and said, "We need a tech genius for this, not a veteran." She said that to a literal veteran. Before going further, this channel shares real workplace stories about people who stood their ground when the system pushed back. If that resonates, the subscribe button is right there. No pressure, just good stories told honestly. Now, my name is Catherine Aldridge. At the time this happened, I was the lead systems architect at Pinnacle Solutions, a mid-sized defense and enterprise software contractor based out of Arlington, Virginia. I had been with the company for 8 years. I was employee number 4. I joined when the entire operation was 12 people crammed into a converted dental office in Rosslyn, and I was still there when annual revenue crossed $90 million. I built the original codebase for their flagship product, a real-time threat analytics platform called Sentinel. I designed the architecture. I wrote the authentication systems. I configured the deployment pipelines. Every major technical decision that kept that company running had my fingerprints on it. Before Pinnacle, I spent 4 years in the Army as a signals intelligence analyst. Before that, I put myself through Virginia Tech on a scholarship, graduating top of my class in computer science. I grew up in Roanoke, Blue Ridge Mountain Country. My father worked as a machinist at the Norfolk Southern Rail Yard. My mother taught 7th grade math at a public school that never had enough textbooks. Nobody in my family had ever touched a line of code. I learned programming on a second-hand compact Presario that my uncle pulled from behind a Circuit City. Taught myself C++ from library books when I was 15. I wasn't flashy. I didn't curate a personal brand. I didn't post thought leadership essays on LinkedIn or fly around the country giving keynotes with clever slide decks. What I had was 8 years of institutional knowledge, a security clearance that took 14 months to obtain, and the kind of deep understanding of our systems that you simply cannot learn from a 12-week boot camp or a trending YouTube tutorial. None of that mattered to the people who decided my future. The trouble started in January, right after the holiday break. Pinnacle had just been acquired by a larger firm called Trident Dynamics, a private equity-backed conglomerate that was snapping up mid-tier defense contractors like they were collecting trading cards. The acquisition brought new leadership, new org charts, and a brand new vice president of human resources named Brenda Holloway. Brenda came from consumer tech. She had spent a decade at companies where everyone was 28, wore minimalist sneakers, and believed culture fit mattered more than competence. She had a very specific vision for what Pinnacle's engineering team should look like going forward. That vision did not include a 38-year-old woman who preferred terminal windows to Slack emojis. The first sign came during the all-hands meeting in late January. Brenda stood at the front of the new open-plan office. They had torn down the walls of our old workspace during renovations because apparently collaboration requires the complete elimination of privacy, and delivered a presentation about Pinnacle's talent transformation strategy. The slides were stuffed with buzzwords: synergistic innovation, next-generation ideation, agile human capital optimization. I sat in the back row next to my colleague Janet Wu, our senior database engineer. We exchanged a look that communicated more than any PowerPoint deck ever could. "We're entering a new era," Brenda announced, clicking to a slide showing a stock photo of diverse young people high-fiving around a laptop. Trident's leadership believes that Pinnacle's greatest opportunity lies in modernizing not just our technology, but our talent pipeline. We need fresh perspectives, innovative thinkers, people who are native to the technologies that will define the next decade. Native to the technologies. I wrote those technologies. I literally wrote the code running on the servers at that very moment, keeping every client dashboard alive, every data feed secure. 2 weeks later, I was called into a meeting with Brenda and my direct manager, Tom Eckhart. Tom had been at Pinnacle for 3 years. Decent project manager, organized, punctual, solid with clients, but he didn't understand the technical side. Not really. He relied on me for every architecture decision, every code review, every midnight emergency fix. I was the engine, he was the hood ornament. Tom wouldn't make eye contact when I walked in. That told me everything. Brenda smiled, the kind of smile people rehearse in front of bathroom mirrors. "Catherine, thank you for making time," she said, as though I had any choice in the matter. "We wanted to discuss some exciting changes happening on the engineering team." "We've been evaluating the team structure," Brenda continued, folding her hands on the conference table, "and we believe there's an opportunity to bring in specialized talent to take Sentinel to the next level. Someone with deep expertise in modern cloud-native architectures, machine learning integration, and next-generation DevOps practices." I sat completely still. "We need a tech genius for this, not a veteran. Someone who lives and breathes cutting-edge development. Someone who can reimagine the platform from the ground up. Not a veteran." She actually said those words, out loud, in a room with 2 witnesses, to a woman who had served 4 years in the United States Army. I asked what this meant for my position. "We're restructuring your role," she said. "We'd love to keep you on in an advisory capacity, consulting, part-time. You'd be available to answer questions, assist with documentation, that sort of thing." Part-time consulting, after 8 years of building everything they had. "Who's replacing me?" I asked. Brenda's smile stretched wider. "We've recruited an incredibly talented young engineer from Silicon Valley. His name is Kyle Renner. He was the lead architect at a startup called Novamind. They were doing groundbreaking work with AI-driven analytics. He graduated Stanford at 22, was featured in Forbes 30 Under 30, and he's spoken at 3 major tech conferences this past year. We're thrilled." Kyle Renner, 26 years old, Stanford pedigree, Forbes profile, former lead architect at Novamind, a startup that, as I would later discover, had burned through $42 million in venture capital, never shipped a single production product, and quietly dissolved 8 months before Kyle applied to Pinnacle. Brenda didn't mention that part. Tom finally spoke. "Catherine, we really value everything you've done. This isn't about performance, it's about evolution. The industry is changing, and we need to change with it." I looked at Tom, the same man who had called me at 11 on a Friday night 6 months earlier because a server migration went sideways and he couldn't tell the difference between a load balancer and a lunch break. The man whose name appeared on project deliverables that I had single-handedly built. That man was now telling me the industry had evolved past me. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I asked for the consulting terms in writing, requested a copy of my personnel file, and stood up. Janet was waiting in the hallway. She had heard the rumors. "They can't be serious," she said. "They are." "What are you going to do?" I'm going to document everything.
Kyle Renner started on a Monday morning. I was still in the office that week, transitioning responsibilities and writing documentation nobody had asked for, but that I knew would eventually become critical. He arrived wearing a cashmere hoodie that probably cost more than my first car. He carried an artisanal waxed canvas messenger bag, a titanium water bottle with a sticker that read, "Move fast and break things." That sticker turned out to be the most honest thing about him. Brenda personally walked him around the office, introducing him to everyone like a visiting dignitary. When they reached my desk, now shoved into a corner since they had already reassigned my old workstation near the server room, she paused. "Kyle, this is Catherine. She's been with Pinnacle for a while, and she'll be available on a consulting basis if you have questions about the legacy systems." Legacy systems. She called Sentinel a legacy system. The platform was barely 3 years into its current iteration. I had refactored the entire backend 18 months earlier using modern microservices architecture. It ran on Kubernetes clusters with automated scaling. There was nothing legacy about it, but legacy was the word they used to make it sound like I was maintaining a COBOL mainframe from 1987. Kyle shook my hand with the firm grip and laser eye contact of someone who had read a book about power dynamics. "Cool to meet you," he said. "I've been looking at the code base. Interesting choices." Interesting choices. That is what he said about 8 years of battle-tested, production-hardened code that had never experienced a critical system failure. I smiled and said, "Welcome aboard." Over the next 2 weeks, Kyle launched his transformation of Sentinel. He immediately scheduled a series of meetings he called architecture sprints, laying out his vision for rebuilding the platform from scratch. He wanted to rip out the existing database layer and replace it with a graph database. He wanted to rewrite the API gateway using a framework released 4 months prior with fewer than 2,000 GitHub stars. He wanted to integrate a machine learning pipeline for predictive threat analysis, despite the fact that our government clients had extremely rigid data handling requirements and had never once requested predictive analytics. I attended the first architecture sprint as an observer. Janet was there. So were 3 junior developers, Malik, Christine, and Raj, who had been on my team and now reported to Kyle. Kyle stood at the whiteboard drawing diagrams that looked impressive but made zero engineering sense. He kept throwing out phrases like paradigm-shifting architecture and zero-friction data mesh and autonomous deployment intelligence. Malik caught my eye from across the table. His expression said everything words couldn't. After the meeting, Christine came to my desk. "Catherine, that framework he wants to use for the API gateway, I researched it. The documentation is incomplete, it's maintained by one person, and there are open issues flagged as critical security vulnerabilities." "Did you tell him?" "I tried. He said I was thinking in legacy patterns." I told Christine to put her concerns in writing, email it to Tom, CC me, be specific, stay professional, and keep a copy of everything. By the end of Kyle's second week, the cracks were splitting wide open. He had convinced Tom and Brenda to approve a full rewrite of Sentinel's authentication module, the component handling secure login for every government client on the platform. The existing module used multi-factor authentication, built to comply with NIST Special Publication 800-63 guidelines. It had been independently audited twice. It had never been breached, not once in 8 years. Kyle replaced it with a custom OAuth implementation he described as more elegant. He deployed it to staging on a Thursday afternoon without running the full test suite. By Friday morning, the staging environment was throwing authentication failures on every single test account. Malik spent his entire Friday trying to untangle it. He called me at 6 in the evening. "Catherine, I can't figure out what he did.
The token refresh logic is circular. It's generating tokens that invalidate themselves immediately. I've never seen anything like this. I have, I said. It's a race condition in the session handler. He's using an asynchronous call without a mutex lock. Pull the old module from the Git history, create a branch, run it parallel in staging. Don't touch his code. Let it fail on its own and document every failure. Malik went quiet for a moment. You knew this was going to happen. I've been doing this a long time. The authentication disaster was just the appetizer. The following week, Kyle attempted to migrate the primary database from PostgreSQL to his preferred graph database. He didn't create a rollback plan. He didn't coordinate with DevOps. He simply began migrating tables on a Wednesday afternoon during business hours while government clients were actively using the platform. The migration corrupted 3 data tables. 2 of them contained classified threat intelligence for a Department of Defense subcontract. Janet spent 48 consecutive hours recovering data from backup snapshots. She told me afterward it was the most stressful experience of her 20-year career. Tom sent a company-wide email praising Kyle for his bold vision and urging the team to be patient with the transition. The email said nothing about corrupted classified data, nothing about Janet working 2 straight days to save the company from a contract violation that could have cost them their security certification. I saved that email. Then came the deployment pipeline. Kyle decided that Pinnacle's existing CI/CD setup, which I had built using Jenkins with automated testing, security scanning, and staged rollouts, was antiquated. He replaced it over a single weekend with a Frankenstein pipeline cobbled from 3 tools that were never designed to work together. The first time someone pushed code through his new pipeline, it deployed directly to production without executing a single test. A monitoring dashboard bug went live and displayed incorrect threat levels to a client at the Department of Homeland Security. That error triggered an automated incident response protocol at a federal agency. That was when the voicemails started arriving. The first one came on a Tuesday night. Kyle's voice was strained but still clinging to composure. "Hey, Catherine, it's Kyle. I'm having a minor issue with the deployment rollback. The pipeline isn't recognizing previous build artifacts. If you get a chance, could you give me a call? No rush, thanks." I didn't call back. I saved it. The second voicemail arrived the next morning. His voice had shifted. The confidence was draining out. "Catherine, hey, me again. The rollback situation is actually bigger than I thought. Production is serving the wrong build to 3 client instances. I think there's a configuration issue with the container orchestration. I know you set up the original Kubernetes clusters. If you could walk me through the namespace structure, that would be really helpful. Call me when you can." I didn't call back. I saved it. The third came at 11:30 that same night. The composure was gone. "Okay, so I think I might have accidentally deleted the production namespace. I'm not entirely sure. The cluster is showing 0 running pods. I've been trying to rebuild from the manifest files, but I can't find the manifests. Where are the manifests, Catherine? Please call me." Saved. And then came the fourth, 2:47 in the morning, the one where his voice cracked, the one where he begged, the one that started this entire story. I saved every single one. The next morning, my phone rang again. Not Kyle this time. Tom. Because Kyle had apparently called Tom in a full panic, and Tom, a man who still couldn't distinguish between a Docker container and a shipping container, had absolutely no idea what to do. "Catherine, I know this is unusual, but we need you to come in today. There's a critical situation with the platform, and we could really use your expertise." "Tom, I'm a part-time consultant now. Those were the terms you offered me. My consulting rate is $250 an hour with a 4-hour minimum. Would you like me to send over a contract? Long silence on the other end. I'll call you back, he said. He called back 20 minutes later. The rate was approved. Funny how fast budgets open up when production servers are burning. I drove to the Arlington office that afternoon. The moment I walked through the doors, I could feel the difference. The open plan workspace that Brenda had been so proud of felt like a triage center after a natural disaster. Malik was at his desk, with dark circles carved under his eyes, and 4 empty energy drink cans lined up on his desk like tin soldiers. Christine was on the phone with a client, speaking in the careful, measured cadence of someone trying to prevent a full-scale crisis from becoming an extinction event. Raj was staring at his monitor with the hollowed-out expression of a man who had been debugging someone else's catastrophic mistakes for 72 hours without a break. Kyle was in the conference room with the door shut. Through the glass walls, I could see him sitting alone, hunched over his laptop. The cashmere hoodie was wrinkled and stained. The artisanal messenger bag lay crumpled on the floor. The titanium water bottle with its "Move fast and break things" sticker was nowhere in sight. I didn't go to the conference room. I walked to my old corner desk, exactly as I had left it, sat down, opened my laptop, connected to the network, and started assessing the full scope of the damage. It was catastrophic. The production Kubernetes cluster had been partially deleted and then incorrectly rebuilt with mismatched configurations. The database migration had scattered orphaned tables and shattered foreign key relationships across the entire data model. Kyle's custom CI/CD pipeline had pushed untested code to production 4 separate times in 7 days. His authentication module was generating session tokens that expired after 30 seconds, locking every user out of their accounts in an endless loop. And the monitoring system he had improved was firing false alerts to 3 government clients, including one that had triggered an automated incident response protocol at the Department of Homeland Security. It took me 6 hours to stabilize everything, not because the fixes were complicated. Most of them involved reverting to the systems I had originally built. The hard part was untangling the wreckage Kyle had piled on top: half-finished migrations, broken configurations, custom scripts referencing environment variables that didn't exist, deployment manifests pointing to container images that had been overwritten. Malik helped. Janet helped. Christine and Raj helped. The 4 of them worked alongside me the way we always had, communicating in the shorthand that comes from years of shared experience, anticipating what the other person needed before they asked. At 9:30 that evening, the platform was fully stable. Every client dashboard was operational. Authentication was restored. The deployment pipeline was running on the original Jenkins configuration with full test coverage. I executed a complete system diagnostic, documented every change, and compiled a detailed incident report. Then I emailed it to Tom, Brenda, and the entire Trident Dynamics executive leadership team. I CC'd the company's legal department, and I attached a zip file. Inside it, every voicemail Kyle had left me, Christine's original email documenting her security concerns, Janet's incident report on the corrupted database tables, and the formal complaint from the DHS client about false threat-level notifications. Then I drove home, made a cup of chamomile tea, and slept for 12 hours straight. The meeting was called 3 days later. 4th floor conference room, the one reserved for board presentations and high-stakes client meetings. In 8 years at Pinnacle, I had never once been invited into that room. When I walked in, every seat at the long mahogany table was occupied. Tom sat at the far end, looking like a man who had just realized his parachute was actually a backpack.
Brenda was beside him, and for the first time since I had known her, the rehearsed smile was completely gone. Her face was gray. Kyle sat across from them, staring at the table surface, refusing to lift his eyes. At the head of the table sat Robert Forsyth, the CEO of Trident Dynamics. Beside him was a woman I didn't recognize, later identified as Trident's general counsel, Andrea Park. The meeting room froze when Robert opened a manila folder and placed a single sheet of paper flat on the table. "This," he said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that doesn't need volume, "is a formal complaint from the Department of Homeland Security regarding unauthorized data exposure and false threat level notifications originating from our platform. They are actively considering termination of our contract. That contract is valued at $37 million over 5 years. Total silence. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. Robert turned to Brenda. "You told me you were bringing in the best talent available. You assured me the engineering team needed fresh blood. You characterized the existing staff as outdated." Brenda's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Robert looked back at the folder. "I have spent the last 48 hours reviewing the documentation Miss Aldridge submitted. I've listened to 4 voicemails. I've read every incident report. I've spoken individually with 3 members of the engineering team." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the room. "What I've learned is that we took a functioning, secure, battle-tested platform, a platform that had never experienced a critical failure in its operational history, and handed it to someone whose primary qualification was being photographed for a magazine. And in the span of 3 weeks, we nearly lost our most important government client, compromised classified defense intelligence data, and exposed this company to legal liability severe enough to end us." He turned to me. His expression shifted. Not soft exactly, but something close to respect. "Ms. Aldridge, I owe you an apology. On behalf of Trident Dynamics and Pinnacle Solutions, I am genuinely sorry. Your expertise, your judgment, and your 8 years of contributions to this organization were not merely undervalued, they were actively dismissed by people who should have known better. That stops today." Then he turned back to the other side of the table. "Brenda, your employment is terminated effective immediately. Tom, you are being reassigned. Mr. Renner, your contract is terminated for cause. Andrea will walk each of you through the details separately." Kyle's head finally came up. His eyes were red and swollen. He looked like he wanted to speak, but Andrea Park placed one hand flat on the table, a gesture so small and so controlled that it said more than any sentence could, and Kyle stayed silent. Robert faced me again. "Catherine, I would like to offer you the position of Vice President of Engineering at Pinnacle Solutions. You would report directly to me. Full authority over all architecture decisions, hiring, and team structure. Your compensation will reflect the actual value you bring to this company, if you're willing." I didn't answer immediately. I looked around that 4th-floor conference room. I looked at the glass walls. I looked beyond them at the open-plan office, at the corner desk where they had shoved me when they decided I wasn't good enough. I thought about every late night, every emergency fix, every time Tom had put his name on work I had done, every system I had built that kept this company breathing. "I have conditions," I said. Robert nodded. "Name them." Janet Wu gets promoted to Senior Engineering Director. She earned it years ago. Malik, Christine, and Raj all receive title adjustments and salary increases that reflect the work they've actually been doing, not the work they were credited for. The open plan layout gets reconfigured. My team gets proper workspaces with walls and doors, and every future hiring decision for the engineering department runs through me, not through HR, not through a recruiter scrolling Forbes lists, through me. Robert Forsyth didn't hesitate for even a second. "Done." I accepted the position, not for the title, not for validation. I took it because that company, that code base, that team, those clients represented 8 years of my life, and I was not going to stand by while someone else's incompetence and someone else's bias burned it to the ground.
Kyle Renner cleared out his desk that same afternoon. His tenure at Pinnacle Solutions lasted exactly 23 days. I heard later that he updated his LinkedIn to say he had served as a strategic technology consultant at the company. That is a creative interpretation of what happened. Brenda Holloway was gone by end of the week. She didn't say goodbye to a single person on the engineering team. Tom was reassigned to a project management role at one of Trident's smaller subsidiaries in Columbus. I heard he's doing fine there. I hold no particular grudge against Tom. He was a weak person placed in a role that demanded strength, and when the pressure came, he folded. That's not malice, that's just inadequacy. Janet got her promotion. She cried when I told her, and Janet Wu is not a woman who cries easily. Malik, Christine, and Raj received their raises and new titles within 2 weeks. I restructured the entire engineering team so that every developer had clear ownership of their domain, proper resources, and the autonomy to make real technical decisions. The DHS contract was saved. It took 3 months of intensive work, 2 independent security audits, and a personal presentation I delivered to a deeply skeptical government review board. But we kept it, all $37 million. The platform held because the foundation I had built was fundamentally sound. Kyle had damaged the surface, but he hadn't reached the bones. The bones were solid. They were always solid. I still have those voicemails backed up on an encrypted drive in my home office. I don't listen to them anymore. I don't need to. They served their purpose when it mattered. They were proof, not just of one person's failure, but of a larger truth that too many companies learn only after paying the price. Expertise isn't a buzzword on a slide deck. It isn't a line on a resume or a profile in a magazine. Expertise is knowing what will break before it breaks. It's understanding not just how a system works, but why it was built that way in the first place. It's the institutional memory that tells you there's a note buried on line 412 of a configuration file explaining why a certain parameter must never be changed. It is 8 years of quiet, unglamorous, essential work that never once made a magazine cover. You cannot replace that with a cashmere hoodie and a conference keynote. If there is one thing this experience carved into me permanently, it is this. Documenting everything is not paranoia. It is professionalism. Every email I saved, every voicemail I archived, every incident report I filed, they were not weapons, they were evidence. And when the moment finally arrived, when the right people were in the room and ready to hear the truth, that evidence spoke with a clarity that no buzzword, no resume bullet point, and no 30 under 30 profile could ever match. My name is Catherine Aldridge. I am the Vice President of Engineering at Pinnacle Solutions. I was employee number 4, and after everything they tried, after every way they attempted to push me aside, I am still here. Because legacy is not a dirty word. Legacy is the thing that lasts when everything else falls apart.